Hello everyone, and welcome to my new video. Cersei Lannister, the reigning supreme of Westeros. If you've had the pleasure of watching a Game of Thrones or reading A Song of Ice and Fire, you'll know Cersei is the queen bee. At least for a while she is. She's cunning yet naive, ruthless yet reserved, powerful yet vulnerable. Throughout the first few seasons of the show, we are shown that Cersei is an absolute beast when it comes to the political landscape of Westeros. She has manipulated a king to believe her illegitimate children are his. She prides herself on killing her enemies and has the most powerful man in Westeros, outside of her husband, the king, as a father. She comes from an established family within Westeros, being raised to value power in all of its forms, being taught to trample over those at the bottom in order to secure a spot at the top. Cersei seems to be one of the more polarizing characters among first-time viewers. For the viewer, she serves as a source of fear and anxiety as she is at odds with some of our fan favorites such as Ned and Tyrion, yet also a source of comfort and safety when viewed from the perspective of her children. All that said, I feel that the show has let Cersei Lannister down. Why do you say that, you may ask, and I have a lot to say. Within the last 3 seasons of the show, her character makes some decisions that are seemingly without reason, or will only result in her eventual destruction. Everyone knows from the minute you watch the show that Cersei must die. However, after watching 8 seasons of her stepping on shit, she deserved a great death, not a character death. In this video, we will talk about some of the moments that broke Cersei Lannister fundamentally. We will go into detail about how these decisions eventually landed her here, and how she could have actually won the Game of Thrones. I will be going solely based off events that occurred in the show, as the series of novels has not been completed yet. If you do not know, Game of Thrones ran out of source material from the novels after season 4, I believe. This means they essentially just started to make shit up and tried to put George R.R. Martin's watermark on it. This obviously did not go over well with fans, especially the ones who actually have read these extremely detailed novels, falling in love with the characters and the world that was built, only for the characters we come to know and love to be wrecked, their storylines forgotten, and their lives rendered meaningless in the overarching plot of the show. With all that being said, I want to get into the very first reason I have listed here that she is broken, and that would be her betrayal of the Tyrells. My only commentary on the brokenness of this situation is the hypocrisy of it all. I have to side with the High Sparrow on this one. How dare Cersei, a whore, try to slut-shame Loras while also being slightly homophobic? You're just kind of insane at this point, Cersei. Does she not remember the fact that she is sleeping with her brother and has a history of sexually abusing her own cousin? Why would she insist on creating an environment full of religious vigilantes, especially with Tywin dead? Not only this, but she allowed the High Sparrow to essentially take control of King's Landing in what seemed like a week. He then assembled a new and improved faith militant, armed them with wooden spiky things, and they were automatically presented as a real threat to the trained warriors of the Lannister and Tyrell armies. I have never seen such a hesitation for a direct confrontation or battle in the show ever. It just seemed like this is a scene that they were just afraid to allow to happen for some reason, because they realized that the stupidity of it all would kind of just be exposed. There is a scene in which Tommen has an actual king moment and seeks to go to war to free Marjorie, or at least have a direct confrontation with the High Sparrow about her imprisonment. This is one moment in which we get to see King Tommen have his own ideas on what a king should do. And what does Cersei do? She stops him for her own envious reasons. She cannot stand to see her son with another woman. That isn't even bad for him. Sure, Marjorie had a tight grip on Tommen, but what older woman wouldn't have a younger man sort of submissive in that way? But she ultimately did seem to care for Tommen. Maybe she cared for him so much she realized he needed to be freed from his mother's wing in order to be a successful ruler. But again, Cersei stops Tommen from acting on what he knows is the right thing to do, and for this she suffers the consequences. The fact that she's just traveling around with no Kingsguard or no personal security is also hilarious to me, because what reason would she have to genuinely trust this imbecile that she doesn't even share religious beliefs with? This whole storyline is just a bit all over the place. It starts off somewhat interesting, you could say, and the tension for a collision is built between the Lannister and Tyrell armies and the Faith Militant. It was built up actually beautifully, I would say, but the conclusion was just an easy way out of dealing with a very complex, dangerous situation that Cersei created. We ultimately do get the insane walk of shame scene due to her negligence, which was worth it, but let's just say she kind of overdid it with the revenge part. Maybe this is what's running through her head as she's watching the citizens of King's Landing be toasted alive. Other than having a beautiful daughter, what exactly did the Tyrells even do to this woman to get her to hate them so much? I understand there were some digs between her and Marjorie, but she literally started it, and has been extremely envious of how Marjorie is able to seemingly control her sons and connect with others. She doesn't see the value in having Marjorie as an ally, and maybe I can understand that, but the Tyrell family provides King's Landing with most of its wheat and food supply, if I'm not mistaken. In what way is it beneficial to arrest the heirs of this great house, and they do nothing about it? Deep sigh. In a thread questioning whether the viewers feel sorry for Cersei or not, this user says, nope, she couldn't play the game of being a good queen. Instead of just letting go of power and being a good queen mother, she wanted to get rid of Marjorie through the faith, who got herself out through sheer intelligence, and Cersei herself fell into the pit she created. But instead of repenting, just blew up the sept, and rightful king and queen faced no consequences and died in her lover's arms. Nope, just nope. She deserved to be eaten by Drogon at least, or die painfully slow, tied naked on the gates of King's Landing. This is where we first start to vividly see that Cersei is not capable of seeing the long-term consequences of her actions. She is most effective at quick and rash decision-making that gives her temporary gratification, only for it to blow up in her pretty smirking face. Seeing Cersei be humiliated by the faith in so many ways was just a huge wake-up call for me, and actually revealed many flaws within her character. When she's not surrounded by people willing to risk everything to protect her, she's extremely vulnerable. At this point, she has zero allies, mainly by her own doing. She cannot stand the idea of people believing that they are her equal, and must constantly take action to show them otherwise. Since we went ahead and touched on this in Reason 1 though, let's just go ahead and move on to Reason 2. Destroying the Sept and Dragonfire. Like, what the actual Cersei? While this is an incredible piece of cinematography, boy does it come with some serious compromises for the viewer. Let's start with how us Marjorie fans were completely snubbed of one of our favorite characters. I mean, Marjorie's death is so quick and meaningless for the literal season spent establishing her as a boss. It is all snatched away from her within 5 minutes. Some other key players were killed here, but this event is primarily responsible for the fall of House Tyrell and the Faith militant being seemingly destroyed. I'm not sure if they literally all decided to be at this one trial, but I mean, okay. Cersei literally dropped an atomic bomb on King's Landing, her own citizens. Anyone within the general vicinity was incinerated, while others were crushed and probably died from falling/burning debris. This is a major catastrophe in the history of King's Landing, a true act of tyranny, and might I add, out of character for Cersei Lannister. Why not execute everyone Red Wedding style? Not only do I think that would have been a more captivating scene to watch, I do not think it limits the creative options available. It actually increases them. Cersei understands risk and reward. This woman crippled Brandon Stark to maintain her secret. She lied about her children being the king's for years and then killed the king to usurp him, risking her life in each and every one of these scenarios. So for her to not send her own troops that support House Lannister in there to slaughter her enemies just doesn't feel natural. There was already tension brewing between the two parties anyway. Why not give that a payoff? It was hinted at that the Faith militant were a lot more capable in their military tactics than they appeared. This still was a theory though that needed to be tested. Cersei was unaware of the true capabilities of these men with no armor and wooden spikes, but it doesn't take a scientist to guess she could have won a head-on confrontation with them. It also doesn't hurt to say it may have been a better climax to such a beautiful scene. Cersei causes Tommen to kill himself because reasons. No one actually gives a fuck about Tommen anyway, barely even Cersei. She randomly displays this sense of detachment upon losing her final child, despite her essentially being the one that killed him. She then assumes the throne for herself, which is undoubtedly one of the most confusing and pointless storylines in the show. We never wanted or needed a Queen Cersei. But let's move backwards in time a bit, shall we? Reason number 3 for her brokenness is actually going to be her blaming Tyrion for the death of Joffrey, her first son. Cersei has very little reason to believe that Tyrion would actually murder Joffrey. Or should I say, the evidence that points to Tyrion is far outweighed by a number of other candidates present at the wedding. For instance, Brienne of Tarth is in attendance, sworn Kingsguard to Renly Baratheon and Catelyn Stark. She has literally every reason to want Joffrey dead, and could be using her newfound closeness with Jaime Lannister to infiltrate the King's Circle. Yet Cersei doesn't seem to consider this. How about her uncle Kevin? He's not particularly fond of his brother's children, and Cersei has literally sexually abused his son for years. What about Marjorie? She fed him pie earlier in the ceremony. Maybe she was in on the plan to poison him. But to use Tyrion handing Joffrey a glass that he was literally forced to hand him as evidence that he planned a murder is borderline insanity. Granted, Joffrey pointed at Tyrion before his death, seemingly as if he personally wanted his uncle to be executed for his murder. This doesn't excuse Cersei displaying a lack of critical thinking when accusing Tyrion. This is why the Tyrion court scene is so good, because he's trying to convince people that pretty much know he's innocent that he is innocent, which is like impossible. Cersei literally went and hired the most violent, massive man in Westeros to be her champion, only to ensure that Tyrion would have zero chance of surviving his trial by combat. Cersei is shown to be so dedicated to believing her brother killed Joffrey despite the evidence showing it could have been a multitude of others. She is ultimately the one who pushes Tywin to go through with Tyrion's execution, which consequently leads to Tyrion killing Tywin while taking a shit. See what lying on people gets you, Cersei? Of course, all this for her to only later get an admission from Lady Olenna. This simply breaks her character, or shall I say, makes her actions over the last few seasons look foolish and misguided, which seems to be a recurring theme in Cersei Lannister's world. Tywin's death ultimately led to the destruction of his house and his family, all but Tyrion. At the funeral, she then tries to insinuate that it is somehow Jaime's fault that their father was killed, which technically it was, but she knows that her and her father had wrongfully imprisoned and convicted Tyrion of murder. Had he left and escaped, there's no telling how far Tywin or Cersei would have went to see him recaptured. Tyrion was backed into a corner by Cersei and Tywin and reacted, yet directed most of his anger at his father, and rightfully so, because ultimately Tywin is the one responsible for facilitating this environment of hatred and deceit within his own family. It's a part of his legacy. Cersei insists that Jaime's relationship with his own brother is the reason that their family has now been destroyed, causing a slight rift between the two that never really heals. Cersei does not use this opportunity to reflect on some of her father's last words to her, however.
I don't distrust you because you're a woman. I distrust you because you're not as smart as you think you are.
But anyways, reason number 4, backing out on her original agreement to help the North. And this is also sort of why I believe she should have never ascended the throne, because her reign will ultimately be wiped from the history books, or it should be, because she is legit the worst monarch that Westeros has ever had, debatably second to Daenerys, who ruled for all of 12 hours. But to summarize what happened with this plot here, Cersei decides to meet up with her ops and try to come to a truce, because there's apparently a bigger op that's trying to smoke on some Westeros peg and have everybody done by the end of the year. So she reluctantly agrees to join forces with her enemies in the north and overseas in order to combat the threat that is in the north, which is obviously the Night King and the White Walkers. Originally, she tried to force Jon to say that he would not jump in her fade with Daenerys, but Jon was like, nah, I can't really do that, bro. This is kind of my girl. And Cersei was pretty much like, oh, okay, bet. Well, I'm not helping you out with shit. But after what seems like a heartfelt talk with Tyrion, yes, Tyrion Lannister, the one she hasn't seen since he murdered their father in cold blood and literally facilitated a manhunt throughout the entirety of King's Landing in search of him. Yeah, she has a huge zombie sumo assassin as her personal assistant and decides for the second time to only almost utilize him. Might I add that the mountain displays a considerable amount of restraint for a zombie sumo assassin. Anyway, Tyrion seemingly talked her into a truce, and this is on the basis of her pregnancy that he's somehow able to notice from her just like sitting there, and she neither confirms nor denies this. And we as the viewer are just supposed to assume this was a spot-on assumption, and I guess Tyrion is now like a pregnancy expert. And this small discovery that ultimately changes nothing about what Cersei hates Tyrion for somehow allows them to put aside their hatred. Questions. But we go through all of this just for her to literally back out. Like, huh? What would have made for a much better and more interesting season 8 was if we got, instead of a half-ass zombie apocalypse battle in Winterfell, or a literal fireworks show of horror at King's Landing, these two storylines could have merged a lot more seamlessly. Instead, they were smushed together like a sloppy sandwich from Wawa at 1 a.m. Then she literally received essentially no real punishment for this crime against humanity she committed. Like, what even is going on right now? Which leads perfectly into my next reason, choosing outright war with Daenerys Targaryen. This is by far the funniest and yet most outrageous thing Cersei Lannister has ever done in her entire 40 years of being the Supreme of Westeros. No, I don't actually know her age, but yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and guess 40 by this point. She chose war with a literal magical warlord queen. She could not admit that she was just beaten. She didn't even try to get in where she fits in and use her intelligence and wit to take Daenerys down. No, she instead chose to murder Daenerys' best friend right in front of her, along with killing one of her two remaining dragons. This realistically is her most broken moment. She doesn't even look like she's truly in her right state of mind. At this point, she's just on some vengeful, unhinged murder spree, specifically capturing and beheading Missandei instead of, I don't know, shooting Tyrion Lannister while she finally has the chance. Like, why do you still care for Tyrion? Honestly, I can admit Daenerys left Cersei with not many choices, but by this point in the story, Cersei deserved to die. Cersei was given various chances to surrender to Daenerys with at least some sort of negotiation on the table, which she did not deserve at that point. Tyrion literally went to bat for her and risked his life to ensure her and her brother's safety. What does she do with this second golden opportunity to find a way out of this alive? I say this is her second chance to come out of this alive because I believe her first chance was simply assisting the North in the battle for Winterfell. I honestly believe Daenerys would have had a change of heart after fighting with the entirety of Westeros at her side. Perhaps her view of the throne and her connection to the land would have changed. Again, storylines we never got to fully explore because of reasons. But let's talk about the actual Battle of King's Landing, if you'd like to call it a battle. I call it more of a bloodbath because that's definitely what it was. Watching Daenerys slaughter what looks to be hundreds of thousands of people was an event, to say the least. It's almost impossible to not connect this directly back to the actions of Cersei. Cersei employed the Golden Company to even the odds with Dany after Dany supposedly lost half of her original army in the Battle of Winterfell. 20,000 men rendered useless to literally one of Daenerys' dragons. Cersei wanted to kill Dany's last dragon so bad, she literally built a circle of scorpions around the city. Like what? I could see if these were machine guns, but we're talking about one-shot devices that must be manually reloaded and don't ensure a kill. Oh wait, excuse me, unless you hit them in the perfect spot on their neck, then they'll just explode like a shaken up soda. Cersei literally doesn't surrender after seeing all 100 of her custom-made scorpions be destroyed by the very thing they are meant to destroy. Cersei's forces did not manage to land a single blow on Drogon. Guess the crew that shot down Rhaegal literally the day before must have taken their PTO. But anyway, she doesn't immediately surrender after seeing not only imminent defeat, but senseless violence and destruction. Instead, she stands there frozen in what looks to be fear with a strong mix of confusion, hunger, pain, and who knows what else. Maybe this is her like truly accepting the L she just took, but I mean, you can't do this while also surrendering? Wouldn't that still give you time to escape the Red Keep and prevent the ongoing rampage that Daenerys is on? Isn't it safe to say that if Daenerys didn't have to destroy all of Cersei's forces at first, maybe she wouldn't have went into complete frenzy mode later? I'd like to think so. But wait, better question. Why isn't she fucking running? Like, what is actually going on with this character that we know and love right now? She literally stands here witnessing her innocent civilians be roasted alive via a fucking dragon for about 15 minutes before she even gets an inkling to leave. Qyburn damn near drags her out the room out of fear of being nuked. You can't make up how bad the writing is at this point. Qyburn is Cersei's only hope. That is a definite new low. Oh wait, she also loses her zombie sumo assassin monster in a ridiculously silly battle sequence. Oh yeah, and the zombie monster sumo assassin also kills Qyburn for like no reason at all, but when I say it's f***ing hilarious, it is pretty f***ing hilarious. Look, I could go on forever about the absurdity of this scene, but let's just say this ended the train wreck that was Cersei Lannister. She dies in what is quite literally the most unsatisfying, disappointing way I've ever seen any major character go out in anything. She literally gets killed by a rock. Oh, and Jaime dies with her. LOL. While that does complete our main list, I did have a few honorable mentions, of course. Like, how could I not mention the fact that she almost kills Jaime at the end of season 7 because he calls her out for being absolutely insane. And every time she makes an empty threat to one of her brothers, her word becomes less valuable to the viewer. She obviously can't bring herself to kill Jaime for wanting to do what they both know is right. So she decides to let her brother and lover, and only support, walk away from her. Why not just join him at this point, Cersei? Both of your blood siblings have seemingly betrayed you to do what is in their best interest, which is supporting the North and Daenerys Targaryen. But no, I guess Euron Greyjoy, the dude that she literally met last week, served as a source of trust and protection for her. Don't even get me started on how her and Euron plan to like fake everyone out, and how Euron made it seem like he pretty much was exiting the war only to still be loyal to Cersei. Like, so pointless and predictable. But I mean, let's see what else. In her dying moment, she resorts to like giving up and crying like a baby, with absolutely zero idea that Jaime is even in King's Landing, but she somehow manages to put herself in the perfect position to encounter him and die in his sister-loving arms. Jaime and Cersei's relationship by the end of the show is even more off-putting than it was in the beginning. It's actually very weird how Jaime doesn't seem to recognize that Cersei is his sister. She is primarily the woman that he loves in his head. He's quick to let anyone know that he loves his sister, including Brienne, who he legit slept with for no reason at all. Jaime and Brienne did not need to have sex, especially if Jaime was going to end up leaving her the next day just to go die with Cersei. In all of the deaths we're given from this series, two of the most important characters are essentially killed off screen and die a relatively peaceful death in comparison to, I don't know, Oberyn, who got his head popped open, Joffrey, who violently suffocated to death. We have Ned Stark, who was beheaded. We have Ramsay, who was eaten by dogs. Robb Stark killed at a welcome ceremony, Catelyn Stark getting her throat slit, Marjorie being incinerated, Varys being incinerated, Dickon and Randall being incinerated, Dany being stabbed, the Night King being stabbed, the Hound falling, the Mountain falling, Rickon taking an arrow to the back, Theon getting wrecked by the Night King, Stannis being beheaded, Mance being burned alive. You get me? Cool. Cersei and Jaime were killed by a collective of bricks and debris. The jokes write themselves at this point. Cersei has the highest body count on the show, only rivaled by Daenerys. Okay, who am I kidding? It's not a rivalry. Daenerys is definitely up 10,000 bodies, but still, Cersei is way more intentional in her malice. Imagine being in the room when this was being written and actually saying, yeah, this is how Cersei Lannister needs to die. Lastly, I just want to talk about this whole pregnancy thing because I found this to be just so pointless. I hate to use that word, but this is a particularly strange era in the show, and if you've watched every single episode, you will know what I mean. Seemed like the writers became slightly obsessed with the idea of Cersei finally deciding to pursue another lover outside of Jaime, even though her loyalty still clearly remained with him, and at some point she even seems to be in a public relationship with Jaime. Enter Euron Greyjoy, however, the pirate of the show who makes way too many jokes. Euron is actually someone I enjoyed when first introduced in the show, however he became a literal joke to me the minute his sole purpose in life became to impregnate Cersei Lannister, which he seemingly fails to do? Who the knows? So literally Cersei pops up one day and is just like, oh pregnant, and I believe she tells Jaime this first, giving us the impression that it is undoubtedly his baby. However, we are then told or shown that she is, I guess, sleeping with Euron. I'll be honest, I don't even vividly remember this scene taking place, but it stated that Euron and her definitely had sex. So whose baby was this then? I mean, it clearly was Jaime's baby, but the fact that Euron could have even posed an actual threat to Jaime in that area is a joke. That is what is undoubtedly broken about this whole show. Euron Greyjoy, at least the show version, is a dirty bastard that turned his back on his brothers when they needed him most to live a life of sailing, stealing, killing, and raping. Cersei Lannister has her flaws, but she's always had a certain bourgeois to her. This is low even for her. The whole unborn child thing is just so wildly silly to me because why? Why would Cersei allow herself to get pregnant after losing 3 of her somewhat young adult children? Tommen's remains were not even a few weeks old before Cersei was trying to pop out another baby boy. And with Jaime, really, Cersei? Has she not realized that the reason her children were cursed went beyond the prophecy that Maggie the Frog gave her and extended into their literal conception? Incest children have an even lower reputation than dwarves or bastard or cripples. Why does Cersei insist on tainting her bloodline continuously in this way? You cannot tell me she has learned nothing throughout 8 seasons of her and her family being targeted as a direct result of her decisions. Or maybe she is just that dumb. I mean, in conclusion, I do think that we have enough good Cersei moments for us to still appreciate the character that she was in the very beginning. I, for one, can confidently say she used to be in my top 3 favorite characters. Like, Cersei's dialogue alone was enough to draw you in those earlier seasons. Despite all the horrible things she's done, we were always ready to hear her reasoning. But as the show progressed, Cersei loses that initial connection she shares with the audience and falls more into the typical cliche villain tropes, such as murdering people and starting wars over her pride and ego. She isn't even able to effectively play this role of a villain because Dany is way better at it and has always been a present threat that Cersei never truly stood a chance against. Reviewed in this video some of the decisions she made that led to her demise and what I think could have changed about some of these scenarios to not only make them a bit more interesting to watch, but also keeping true to the character that George R.R. Martin created. It's a shame that this show will never get the opportunity to write the list of wrongs they've racked up, but I can also admit that in general, this is still an amazing series to watch and one of the best things that you can watch watch on television today. Go watch and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you all for watching.